Get ready for a no BS approach to health and fitness. This is NBS Fitness Radio.
All right, what's up? We're back with NBS Fitness Radio, and I am here with Britten Bailey,
Hello.
aka Lit Brit.
Wow.
I just came up with that. Is that cool?
I'm totally okay with that.
That's your new. That's the new nickname. I like
that one sticks.
Lit Brit.
Like,
Lit has a background in FRC mobility, yoga, Pilates. She does jiu-jitsu as well.
yes.
So, and she is my personal mobility coach. And we've been
True.
working with each other. We started last August, September maybe?
Around there.
So
yeah.
probably about
Last fall.
6 months, a little over 6 months.
Yeah.
Very cool. Okay. So, man, just kind of give us your background and kind of your history, and then we'll kind of go from there.
So my background is not from a traditional fitness approach. My background is really just founded upon me wanting to help humans to be more human and to enjoy the human experience. My professional background began actually in Thailand, living in Thailand, working at an HIV orphanage. I was supposed to be set to stay at a hospital, but I was needed at this orphanage to be a teacher, so I was stationed there. And my stay was, it was eye-opening to say the least. Learning that really Americans tend to lose perspective easily based upon just we're constantly receiving instant gratification.
We got it kind of easy.
We got it a little bit easy.
Yeah.
And it made me realize that my perception of what that experience was going to be like was entirely different from the reality of it. I thought I was going to this really sad place and it was going to be really depressing. And these poor children, orphans, both parents died due to AIDS-defining illnesses, and I was going to be this one that would show up and be this beacon of light. And what an American perspective to have, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Oh yes, we are this magnificent.
They solved the world
Yeah, right. And at this time, I was in my early 20s.
Okay.
So yeah, that's my early 20 self.
What got you over there? How did you come across that?
I was pre-med
Okay.
at the time, and I was like, oh well, let's go to Thailand and work in a hospital. And I found an organization, a non-governmental organization, an NGO that worked with bringing pre-med students to different areas of Thailand and putting them in the hospitals, and they're essentially there to learn and help.
Okay, gotcha.
So I was supposed to be in a hospital, but when I showed up in Bangkok, they were like, oh, by the way, you're actually not going to be in a hospital.
Psych.
Yeah, you're going to this orphanage in the middle of nowhere, just surrounded by rice fields, and that's where you're going to be. And it took me a moment to soak that in. Clearly where we are now with HIV care and prevention is light years above even what it was then. That was 2006.
Yeah.
And especially there. I'm not sure right now where Thailand is with their care and prevention, but I'm pretty sure it's pretty progressive. But then it was viewed as their karma to die. So children were left on the streets of Thailand.
Socially, it was their karma.
It was socially their karma to die.
Oh,
so I know, it was pretty heavy. So there, and my young adult American self, knowing that this was a part of the culture and knowing that these children, both their parents died due to AIDS-defining illnesses, and these children were left on the streets to die, and this is the place that they went to afterwards, I just thought it was going to be, I didn't know.
Very sad,
and depressing place. So I show up, and it was the most magical, beautiful place, and the happiest place I've ever been to, still to this day. It was Disney World wishes that it had this much organic happiness outside of plastic things and
Yeah.
things that we can buy to create that. So they taught me like what happiness was. The community there taught me what happiness was, especially the children. I didn't want to leave. I thought it was the most amazing place I had ever seen and been. And
You were just there for a summer?
I was there for 6 months.
6 months. Okay.
Yeah, and when I left, I asked the orphanage founder, what can I do to repay you for allowing me to stay this long? Because he didn't need me to stay that long. I just wanted to.
Yeah.
And he was like, you don't need to do anything for us, but when you return home, do something for your community in relation to in relation to what we're doing here. And you can define that however. So I came back to Memphis and immediately got linked to Le Bonheur and became one of their HIV education specialists. And for about 6-7 years off on, I worked in that field and worked my way up from like being an educator to training healthcare professionals on how to counsel people who were newly diagnosed. So, heavy topics around that. So I did that. I worked in that field and I absolutely loved it, and it still calls to me. But I knew ultimately it wasn't my end point, and what I wanted to bring out of that first experience from Thailand. And it's also just like out of a love of like humans and wanting to help humans. And also knowing that the hospital system, I'm not made to be in the hospital system.
Yeah.
Like I need windows. At least if I'm gonna be in a building all day, you better give me some windows. And you better get rid of the fluorescent lighting.
Yeah.
I just feel like a rat trapped in a cage. And that's really what led me out of that work. Was eventually you work your way up to a position where you're going to be and kind of in that setting, and it takes you away from the community, away from working with people.
Yeah, more management position.
Exactly.
Let me ask you this: were you training and doing exercise or mobility stuff like back then? Or?
Not at all.
Okay.
I was your everyday,
just jogger.
just girl doing stuff like maybe, I'll go for a jog once a week.
Gotcha. Okay.
Doing it just because you're supposed to do that, and you got to do that to not die. Like the passion for that wasn't there.
Okay.
But I was an athlete in high school, and I connected to sports in a way that I always noticed was a little bit more, a little bit different than my teammates. I felt like almost like a spiritual connection to what I was receiving out of the experience.
Okay.
I know that sounds weird, but I don't know. I think that those of us who fall in love with moving our bodies and using our bodies, there's something deeper that we connect with, and however you define that is going to be different. But yeah.
Okay. So then what?
So I have 2 daughters. At the time, my oldest was 3, and I knew that I needed space to figure out what I needed to do, but I knew that I just felt this calling that I didn't know what it was and wanted to find it, and wanted to create space in my life to do so. And if nothing comes of it, then nothing comes of it. But going down that path of creating space to really find passion was just kind of a worthwhile gamble for me. So I stayed home with Lucy, and that was so rewarding to have that during that space and time, and ended up opening our doors to our house to kids in the community who are younger, preschool age, and their parents want them to have a nature-based, outdoor-based learning environment, care environment. I really didn't like how young children were being put in rooms, again, boxes with fluorescent lighting and no windows, no real things from the earth or real things from the world to play with and manipulate. Outside time being really minimal. Kids sitting in chairs all day. Things that just aren't developmentally appropriate. In my opinion. So we had a nature-based care program, and the kids were outside in all seasons, learning to embrace the seasons, outside as much as we can be.
Very cool.
Yeah, and we did that for, I think I did that for 3 years.
Okay.
3 years. And watching children climb our magnolia tree in the backyard every day led to the realization that what I was really missing in my work in the hospital system was play and using my body. And being able to find that through playing with the children and seeing movement through the child's eyes was just like a paradigm shift for me.
Very cool. Okay.
Yeah. So I discovered movement culture at that time, and that's what led me into yoga and mobility and movement. And it's been history ever since. I've just been on that trail and down that rabbit hole.
That's awesome. Okay. Very cool. So, for people who do not know kind of what movement culture is, what FRC, I think most people can have an idea of like yoga, at least from a surface level sense. You know, they're kind of like, okay, they kind of sit there and stretch a little bit, or breathe in incense and
right.
to funny symbol music, right?
Right.
But like, try to give a little bit more clear definition of like movement culture, FRC, and then I'll kind of say what I was attracted to what you guys were doing and why I sought y'all out. But kind of give a definition first.
Sure. I know that movement culture is something that isn't common in Memphis, it's not common, and it's not common in the South, but it is. Movement culture is a community at large. It's an international community of individuals who train the body in a different way with a different why. And it's almost like there is no why. It is for the sake of generalized movement preparedness. And every person within movement culture is going to answer this question differently. So this is just kind of my take on what it is at large. So it's not specialization. So yoga is specialization. CrossFit is specialization. Dance, you can just list off all the things. Even if let's say a person takes a fitness class, and they take only one kind of fitness class, then that's their specialization. So what the individual within movement culture aims to do is not to aim to become good at one thing or do one thing. It is to explore all the different ways the human body can move, and to do so in a way that creates freedom in how you feel in the body. So we're really not trying to create this incredible one skill that we can do, but it's more about exploring what is possible in the body, and by doing so, we create so much freedom in how our body feels. So we're really free of pain from it, and we also receive a lot of mental clarity from it because it's a lot of mindful work, and we also receive a lot of creative energy from it because it's not looking at using the body from a singular scope or from a singular dimension. It is how many dimensions can we discover, because they are endless.
Let me try to simplify that for people a little bit. So what I've kind of understood, like in my brief introduction, is it's exploring all the many ways that the body can and should move,
right?
Having comfort and control in those different movements, having connection, really deep connection to the entirety of your body and all the different movements that it can do, and being able to take that skill set and that abilities out into the world, into your entire life experience.
Yes.
And not letting your mental or physical state limit you, but kind of finding those edges and pushing them and exploring new things that your body can do. So
it makes the world a playground.
Yeah.
And you approach living in the body as an adult.
Yeah.
In an entirely new way.
Yeah, so so now I'll kind of tell you what attracted me to what y'all were doing. And so, and my background is more like, I played sports in high school and college, and then kind of got really deep into weightlifting, powerlifting, bodybuilding. And over the time of doing that, I got really specialized in force production. And the consequence of that was an extreme lack of mobility, flexibility, and the ability to move pain-free, right? Mm. And so, interestingly enough, like when you have kids and you like watch the way they move, and you're like, my body can't do that.
Right.
It's like they don't have joints or tendons or muscles, like they're made of Play-Doh, right? Or like Gumby, you can just twist them and bend them, and they just move so freely in space. It's kind of crazy. And I was like, man, like, I think having played sports growing up and having had a deeper connection with my body throughout life, whereas like I was introduced to sports early, I did it for a long time. After that, I went into fitness, versus like we're someone who maybe not had been very active in high school and then just was never ever active. They may not be aware of like their lack of ability or lack of connection. But I was like very aware, like, man, my body doesn't feel the way it used to. Like I used to be able to move and do things and be pain free, and I can't do that anymore. I don't feel good. And I had come across Kin Stretch, and we're just kind of like talking to a buddy of ours, Steve, who does BJJ. And I was like, man, have you ever heard of this? He's like, oh yeah, there's a girl here in Memphis that does it. I was like, what? Because had been looking, and I had only found, the only person I found was like in Nashville. I was like, crap.
Well, I gotta update that. I gotta put myself on that map.
Yes, 100%.
I'm on the map for the FRC and FRA. I just, I went to my training a month before COVID hit.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah, I was like, and I didn't know you're on the thing for FRC, but I just like got on this Kin Stretch website, looked, it's like, man, Coach Precious is Nashville. It's like trying to plan, like, well, to make a trip up there, or
no.
they do programming. And then he was like, hey, there's someone in Memphis. And I was like, awesome, man, I'll give you their number. So, so that was kind of like what attracted me in the first place, like what y'all were doing and what I was after.
Kin Stretch is a great modality for mobility.
And I think one of the biggest benefits like I've gotten is, like I said, it's like control and more. It's like a higher level of control, higher level of awareness of what the body should do, can't do. And like for us, a lot of times we kind of push my range of motion up to that edge. And it's interesting that like, because I haven't explored that in a long time, my nervous system is immediately like, nope, shut down. So we're not going to let you do that. It's going to shut down. And then as we do more and more over time, you realize like, oh wow, it's not that I can't do that. It's just I haven't done that enough. And by doing it and putting myself in those positions, now I'm starting to like gain confidence and control. So it is so much more than just a physical journey as much as it is a mental and emotional journey, because like what we've realized is like when you get into these positions, your body starts having a mental and emotional response.
Right.
Like you'll like stop breathing.
Right.
You'll start sweating, get hot. And it's not that your body can't do it, it's just it hasn't done it.
Right.
So talk a little bit more about kind of like some of the philosophies of FRC, Kin Stretch, like how you implement better movement to your clients.
Right. So I use various approaches, and FRC and Kin Stretch is one of them. And the reason why I take on multiple is because, again, when we take on one method of doing things, and this is especially true for gaining control over how we move, then we are really narrowing down the rate in which you receive change in the body.
Okay, well then let's kind of talk about like what some of those different methods are,
Yeah.
and kind of touch on each of one and
For
kind of
sure.
what they are, how it works, and how
Yes.
to do it.
So let's talk about FRC first,
Okay.
since you brought that one up. That's really that's what I've spent the most time in education
Okay.
on, and I find it to be a really solid starting point for people who want to understand movement preparedness and mobility, because it gives you a thought process versus here are prescribed exercises. It gives you a thought process and understanding the human body and understanding how it functions and how it can how the body functions and how it can help you to receive the change that you want to have for your body and how to have it readily available, and it explains the physiology
Yeah.
of it all. So once we have the understanding, then we can apply in so many different ways, and that's a really great seed to plant. And that there aren't prescribed exercises for all people. It is assess the body first, and then through assessment, we can navigate essentially through a chart on what to do and what to prescribe. But the options are really endless in creativity. Once you have the thought process, you understand, then you know how to apply in so many different ways. And each person that is an FRC specialist or teaches can stretch. We're all going to do it a little different because we all have different.
So what is that like FRC framework and thought process?
So FRC, Functional Range Conditioning, was founded by Dr. Andrea Spina, who is a chiropractor and kinesiologist. His I should be able to rattle off his list of accolades. It is extensive. But he invented this system, and the system is a thought process so that we can train the nervous system to have control over movement capacity, so we can make improvements on our flexibility, our range of motion, our end range control, and our overall ability to mitigate injury.
Yeah.
So all of those things combined really does help to also reduce pain in the body. So when we're teaching the body to move the way it's supposed to move, it's functioning optimally, and we can put those parts together. So if we're training each joint, that's one component of the body. When we put those parts together as a whole, the whole body functions really well, and you can apply your ability to move to anything that you love to do. So if you want to do weightlifting, your hips will function like healthy hips, your spine will function like a healthy spine, your shoulders, etc., etc. Your body is just prepared to become more powerful.
Very cool. Yeah, so I think one of the misconceptions, and I'm trying to take this more to like I think you and I can talk on this on like a knowledge level 10, or like you can talk on knowledge level 10, I can talk on a 7 or an 8, and then, but most people need to hear on like a 1 to 3, right?
Right.
So I think for a lot of people, they think like the lack of mobility is just a tissue issue. Like, my muscles are just tight. That's kind of how they're going to describe it. My muscles are tight.
Right.
And there's a degree of that is true, but they don't quite understand that it's actually your nervous system that's primarily in control.
Right.
And so, and that a lot of the pain that you feel, with regards to going through motions or that tightness, a lot of it is like your nervous system kind of just giving you warning systems, or it's that joint that those muscles kind of sending signals to your brain going, hey, wait, we're not used to this, we're not comfortable with this.
Right.
And so what you do for FRC is not like holding and very long stretching, which is what most people kind of think, but there's a component to that. But a lot of it is taking the joints through the end ranges of motion, and really trying to make a mind-muscle connection. It's the idea that we're not just gonna like always passively hold in these long stretches and constantly relax into them. That is a component, but we're actually trying to build muscular control, neuromuscular control through those end ranges of motion. So it feels more like exercise, not extra. It's exercise. It feels more like trying to gain control of muscles in positions that your body's not used to.
Right.
And we kind of do a lot of movements like that.
Right. So it's interesting with flexibility and mobility and understanding the difference between the two and what each one does. I think a common misconception is that a mobility specialist is going to say that flexibility is useless, and that's not true. It's how you use flexibility and when that matters.
Yeah, so the thing that kind of really helped me, can you talk about like define passive range of motion?
Yes.
Define active range of motion, and talk about how you kind of push each of those and try to kind of bridge that gap between the passive and between the active. So what is passive range of motion?
So passive range of motion is your ability to push yourself into a shape.
Or be pushed.
Yeah. Right? So someone else pushing you, or a weight or an object pushing you. So like resistance bands pulling you into a shape.
Think about like what's a common stretch that people might do?
A common stretch that people might do, you often see people in a straddle position sitting down.
With their legs spread.
And they're like, let me stretch over this one leg, or let me stretch to the middle, or to
like
the
a
other
hurdler
leg.
stretch. If you're trying to picture it, think of it as a hurdler stretch. You're on your butt, your legs are out to the side, spread apart, you're like leaning forward or leaning out. Or like think of like the presidential fitness hamstring test, like sit and reach test, right?
Right. So in that hurdle stretch, let's kind of paint that picture.
Yeah.
So you're leaning forward. So you are stretching your hand. You're feeling the stretch on the back side of your leg.
Yeah.
Right. You're pushing yourself into that shape, and to the point to where you feel like you need to stop.
Yeah.
Right.
Or you'd have a coach come up behind you, push you forward, and that would also be passive.
Exactly.
Passive stretch. You're being pushed into that position.
Yes, perfect. So that's passive, being pushed into a shape.
Yeah.
Active is you generating that movement on your own from that particular joint.
Right.
So if we're going to go back to the hurdler stretch, that would be you sitting upright in hurdle stretch and lifting your lead leg.
Yeah.
And that coming from the tissue that controls that movement, which is, where is it lifting from? Well, from that hip.
The hip flexors,
from that hip and all the tissue around it.
Yeah.
You know, it's more of the tissue all around it versus one particular area.
Yeah, so to kind of help people understand, it's like passive range of motion is the ability to be pushed into a position. If you think you're laying on your back, and it'd be like someone picking up your leg and doing a hamstring stretch for you. Correct. Active range of motion would be like you laying on your back or standing up and being able to pick your leg up.
Yes.
And so I think that the way I kind of visualize is like passive range of motion is the total range of motion that you can go through. You can go through, like period. And then active range of motion is like the range of motion that you have access to, that you can access yourself without having to be like pushed into it.
That's correct. And flexibility is passive range of motion.
Yeah.
And mobility is active range of motion.
Yeah.
So that's why if you are going to a mobility class, you're doing different things than you would see in like a yoga class.
Yeah.
We might make similar shapes sometimes, but not always.
Yeah. And so there's typically a gap there, right? Between your passive and your active range of motion.
Yes, there can be.
Yeah. I would say, in untrained individuals, or people who aren't actually pursuing movement, there's usually a pretty decent gap as well. Yes. What is the reason for that gap?
The reason for that gap is really, it comes down to the individual, but it comes.
Potential reasons. A
potential reason would be how they're using their body. If someone, let's say a yogi, if we were to do an assessment on a yogi, a common pattern that I would see is that they can be pushed into a shape pretty deeply, but then if I ask them to generate that movement, it's nowhere near as deep.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's
because they've only been training that passive. They've been constantly just teaching their body to relax into that position,
right,
but not create stability and contract into that position.
Correct. So that's an example for someone who is an active individual and they live a healthy lifestyle. Yeah. Someone who's inactive, a common pattern that I would see is a deficit in both.
Yeah.
So they can't. But
was me.
So yours is and yours now, if we're working on your flexibility and your mobility, and we'll talk about that pattern in a second, but the pattern of the person who is not active at all, they have trouble touching their toes and pushing themselves into the shape to try to touch their toes with their legs straight, but they're also going to have trouble lifting that leg
on their own. They're lacking both passive and active.
Yes.
Yeah.
And in specialization, it depends. So we were talking about the specialization of someone who does yoga. The opposite of that is someone who's going to be training with weights often.
Yeah, or exclusively.
Exclusively. Yeah. So their practice has created and trained stability.
Yeah.
To not be forced past their capacity,
right.
To not let a weight take them suddenly past their point of control.
Yeah.
So they can also show lack of flexibility and mobility because they need to be solid and they need to stick shapes.
Have trained to create as much stability and tension as possible, so much so that it's difficult to go into those longer ranges of motion.
Yes.
That's kind of what happened to me. It was like I just taught my hips, taught my shoulders to create as much tension and stability as possible, so that at the end range of motion, I'm like a rubber band. It's at its absolute max.
Right.
It's great for powerlifting.
Right.
Not so great for pain and just regular movement.
Right. But what I love to tell people who do specialize, don't shame the outcome of it.
Yeah.
It's a part of it. It's a part of the practice.
Yeah.
It's a part of the sport of it. And
but it's a necessity.
It's cool that the body did it because it's supposed to.
Yeah, it was a necessity to achieve the highest level of that at the time.
Yeah.
But understanding, okay, well, there's probably a degree of balance I could have had better there, and understood a little bit better.
I see. What you're saying. Yeah. There's a approach that you could have taken.
So that is not that I should have spent a significant amount of time trying to become more balanced and start doing more yoga, more mobility stuff, because that would have that would have set a ceiling and limited my actual total strength.
Yeah.
But having some understanding and going well, I could probably do at least this much just to maintain a little bit better, or really just to keep those joints a little bit healthier.
Right.
And a little bit more pain free.
I hear you.
All right, so then we've got this passive range of motion, this active range of motion, and we're trying to gain more of each. So what are some of the techniques that you use to gain passive range of motion?
So with passive range of motion, if someone does need to gain more of passive range of motion, because it varies from individual to individual, if one does need to get more flexible and gain passive range of motion, they would need to know where.
Mm-hmm.
So knowing if it's your shoulders, knowing if it's your hips, knowing if it's your spine, all of those things matter, so you can know which one to start with.
Well, that's what we did. Let's say it was my hamstrings.
Got it.
I know my hamstrings are tight and I don't have the passive range of motion. What's the next step?
Right. So if we're working on trying to lengthen the hamstrings, we one thing that I always like to know, and I know this is a nerd note, but it's really important, especially with the hamstrings, is knowing your history. Do you have history of sciatica? Mm-hmm. If so, focus on soft bend in the knee and passive training. Okay. So soft bend in the knee so that we don't aggravate that tissue around that nerve, because a straight leg shape for people that do have sciatica history sometimes can have flare-ups from that. So it's just something to note. It doesn't mean it will, just something to note.
But yeah, I think that would all be that should be a note on, well, why should you probably work with a coach, because they know those types of things and you don't.
Right. I never try to plant that seed of like, this will happen to you, so you should be afraid of trying this. Try a straight knee, see how it works out for you. If you get some back pain, bend that knee a little bit. Yeah.
Okay.
And what's important to know is that when you do a stretch in the shape that creates a stretch sensation of the hamstring, I like to say, scan the position. So maybe get on the floor, scan the position of you reaching forward, see what angle of taking your upper body where you feel the best stretch. Let's define the word best.
Mm-hmm.
Best means where it feels good,
Yeah.
not where it feels like you have to become Yoda to breathe through it.
Yeah.
That's not where your nervous system's at. It's
Yeah.
like your nervous system's just gonna be like, you're trying to ask for you to be a brown belt or a black belt in stretching, but you're a white belt.
Yeah.
So you need to slow your roll, back off of depth, scan the position of where it feels like a nice stretch. Stay there for 3 minutes.
Yeah, because you're gonna have a hard time. Again, this is not just a tissue issue; it's a neuromuscular issue.
Yes.
So if you're in a position where your nervous system is freaking out, i.e., you can't breathe, you feel like your heart rate is increasing, you're gonna have a hard time letting go. So you gotta find that position that feels good. Oh yeah, okay, I can feel that, but you can mentally kind of allow yourself to relax into that position.
Yes. And what's key to know, a second key detail in the difference between active and passive is that passive range of motion creates a temporary window of range of motion.
Yeah.
So it's temporary. Active, it's readily available.
Yeah.
You own it. You don't have to warm up to be able to do it.
Right. Yeah. So okay. Let's just go ahead and talk about that, because one of the things like that people experience is we'll sit in a stretch, or we'll do whatever, and we're getting this passive stretch, and after we get out, we're like, man, that felt great. Like I can move better. I've got that release of tension. Like I feel good.
Right.
And then the next day, you're just right back to being tight again.
Right. Which is why you go back to it. It's like a fix. You need to go back to it.
So like prescriptive wise, if passive range of motion is something someone needs to improve or is trying to improve, how often and how long? You said 3 minutes in that stretch. So how often, how frequent do they need to be holding that stretch?
Oh man, the classic how long, and it really does depend
On the individual. But give
I'll give
the average of general range.
Right.
Like it's not once.
Yes.
You
So
know.
if you're going to work on your mobility and your flexibility, a good little starting point recipe is maybe work on your mobility Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and maybe work on your flexibility Tuesday, Thursday.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean isolate the worlds. They have to work together.
Yeah.
One requires the other.
Okay. Well. Okay. Then let me try to summarize that. So is that you need to be working on your range of motion, not just saying passive versus active, but you need to be doing range of motion daily to be able to see that sustained, or probably to be able to see that sustained improvement.
You don't need to do it daily, but if you did do it daily, you would see results from daily work.
Yeah, okay.
If you're going to do 3 days a week, you're going to see a rate of what percentage would be produced out of 3 days. It's really a mathematical equation, but you can only overtrain your mobility if you are taking it past a belt level that your body is ready for.
Yeah. Well, I guess
That
I'm trying
makes
for someone to kind of go, okay, well, yeah, my hamstrings are tight. Like,
That doesn't mean go stretch your hamstrings every day.
okay, got it.
That would the reason why I say that is because what it does mean is when you do your work, when you work on flexibility, when you work on mobility, you are making choices based upon how you feel after.
Yeah, okay.
So how you feel after really matters.
Okay.
And that's what tells you
What to do next.
what to do next, so how much to do. If you feel sore all the time, you're not going to get gains.
Gotcha.
You're not. You've got to have rest days.
Yeah.
And you've got to know when to put those rest days in based upon how you feel. It's not a recipe.
Yeah.
It's really not a schedule. It's learning, and this is a part of building a relationship with your body,
Yeah.
is learning to listen to cues of soreness, pain,
Yeah.
fatigue, and then making adjustments based upon those feelings. Other feelings you might feel. Suddenly you feel more flexible. Cool. It looks like you're ready to get back into the work because your body's saying it's ready for more.
I'm ready to go
Yeah,
back.
I'm ready to go back. I'm not fatigued by the work.
Versus if you're like, man, I'm tight today, and I should go back and just push it even harder.
Right.
Maybe like your body kind of say, hey man, you push it too much.
Right.
Well, we're trying to protect ourselves a little bit here. Like give us a break.
Do the things that make me feel like I've got a warm blanket.
Yeah, it makes me feel good.
Yeah, it makes me feel good.
So passive range of motion can be improved through kind of sitting in those positions, relaxing in those positions. How is active range of motion then gained?
How is it gained?
Yeah, how are you making improvements in active range of motion? So you kind of said like, you call it the active passive gap, I believe.
Yeah.
So the idea being like, we want both of these, for most people, we're trying to make improvements in both of these.
Yeah.
But we're also trying to kind of bridge that gap. You know, it's necessary for the yogi
Yeah.
want to have this significant passive range of motion with the active range of motion like lagging behind. So how do we kind of make those improvements in active range of motion?
Yes. So if someone's at a starting point with trying to work on their active range of motion, spend a little time exploring what each joint is supposed to do and can do. And you might be wondering, well, I don't know what a hip's supposed to do. Move it around. Move it around and see where you can't move into.
Yeah.
And that helps you to define your range of motion, helps you to see what circular path that hip can make and what your hip can make. And as you're doing that, you're feeling, where does it feel painful? Where does it feel limited? Where does it feel good? You're asking yourself, you're just taking inventory the whole time. And that helps you to learn where your limitations are. So do that with each joint. Take each joint through like circles.
Yeah. Okay. So, and we call those what?
CARs.
Okay. And what's that stand for?
Controlled articular rotation. We are taking circles. We're doing circles in a specific way.
Yeah.
Where we're not moving anywhere else. We're just moving in that one joint.
Yeah. It's and that's very difficult. Even having been in the fitness space for like so long as myself, and thinking I was doing, hip circles, shoulder circles, whatever. I was doing these with isolation. Like you quickly, I'm like, nope. You're using your entire body to move that one joint.
The whole body is contracted to not move.
Yeah.
The whole body, the rest of the body is like a statue. That one joint is doing the movement.
Yeah. So like you think you're doing a hip circle. You're really just twisting.
You're really just twisting
shoulder circle. You're just twisting
easy, If it feels easy, you haven't arrived at the point of understanding yet.
Right. 100%. Yeah, I think we would do sets of 2 or 3 hip cars, and if done correctly, I was like, done. Like,
right.
I'm smoked. I need a break. I need to breathe. I need to breathe. I'm sweating like crazy from doing 3 hip circles correctly.
Yeah.
And you're like, wow, okay, that was hard as crap. And then, but you feel it. Like you feel that hip actually going through the new in ranges of motion, and all those muscles that are like, I haven't contracted in this position.
It's like you're carving out
a long time.
It's like you're carving out a new circle.
Yeah, but
a little bit bigger than your old circle.
Yeah. That's a great way to describe it. It's like constantly making a little bit bigger circles.
It's like I picture like that. I don't know, what is that, chisel on wood, just like
just kind of chiseling away a little bit more.
That kind of makes my nervous system feel a little like on edge though, with the tissue at hand.
You're not removing tissue.
You're not removing tissue.
So for our passive range of motion, sitting in that position, relaxing in that position, letting the kind of neuromuscular system learn to move a little bit deeper, relax. And then for the active range of motion, we like to use CARs and contractions and kind of control those end ranges of motion and gain more and more control.
Right.
And so we do something that you call pails and rails.
Yes.
So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. Progressive angular isometric loading / rails.
Yeah.
Regressive angular isometric loading. So really it's just a bunch of words that mean we are working on all of the tissue that is involved in the movement.
Yeah.
So I like to say the front side stuff and the back side stuff.
Yeah.
And the reason why I say stuff and why the word stuff is very commonly used in the FRC world is because it's more than just muscle. It is everything involved. It's all connective tissue.
Yeah.
It's all of those things are being used and worked.
Yeah, very cool. I mean, yeah. And so kind of talk a little bit about what Pels and Rails looks like or what it is.
Yeah, so a lot of this work to the eye looks very simple, but within Pales and Rails, you're working on contracting the topside tissue to pull you into the shape of the movement that you're trying to work on. So let's say you're trying to work on, let's go back to that hurdler stretch. We're going back to that lead leg. So that lead straight leg, you're imagining the front side of the top side of your leg. You're contracting everything you can on the top side, and you're imagining that that's pulling your upper body to your leg. I like to say we're squeezing a lemon at the hip flexors, and we're trying to make lemonade.
Yeah.
And then the rails is the push.
Yeah.
And the rails is the bottom side tissue.
Yeah.
So we're imagining everything on the bottom side of that leg, the contraction from it is driving you away from the earth, the upper body away from the earth.
Yeah. It's like kind of going into close towards your end range.
Yes.
And then creating contraction in both directions and kind of going back and forth.
Yeah.
Contracting the tissue around that joint. And what you're doing is you're teaching the tissue and the neuromuscular system to create stability and create contraction and relaxation in a coordinated fashion so you can get more range of motion, both passive and active out of that. And
isometric contractions, they're simple and they create a lot of change.
Yeah.
They provide a lot of information to the nervous system, and when you're trying to contract the front side of the leg and then the back side of the leg in reps, all you're doing is just ramping up how much control the nervous system, how much you're just feeding your nervous system information.
I think one of the biggest takeaways for me, and I think something if you are more of a strength athlete that you could take away is, to me, cars and Pels and Rails are some of the best warm-up movements that you could ever do prior to doing a strength training thing.
For sure.
Because it's helping you create stability at the same time you're gaining more range of motion. So if you're preparing for a squat or preparing for a bench or whatever, it's like you don't want to go in unwarmed up.
Right.
You also don't want to go in and do a bunch of passive stretching where you're just creating relaxation in those muscles. That's not going to create
because you've added load.
Yeah. It helps you gain the range of motion that you need to help prevent injury at the same time creating stability that you need to also prevent injury.
Right. So if you're going to be adding load of any kind in whatever it is that you specialize in, so whatever sport you do, like let's say you're about to do weights, you're about to lift overhead, when we passively stretch, this is the third thing to know about the difference between passive and active.
Okay.
When we passively stretch, it's not giving the nervous system preparedness information.
Yeah.
It's just saying, hey, suddenly be able to be moved past your point of control.
Yeah.
Which is like, let's imagine.
Not what you want when you're about to load it.
Right, now we're about to load it. The nervous system is required to be involved when we add load to control it. That's our mobility.
Yeah.
So instead we've said, hey, be able to move past your point of control, but here's this extra weight that now suddenly is going to feel really floppy in that shoulder when you start to lift overhead.
Yeah.
And then the nervous system falters and there's potential for injury.
Yeah.
So it's something to do with warming up whenever you're doing weights, is to focus more on a mobility-based exercise, something where you are generating the movement yourself, or you're generating contractions around the tissue that control that movement. So if you're lifting overhead, that's shoulder flexion, that's arm straight up over by the ear. So maybe doing something where you can have that arm overhead and you can push into something with the palm. like an overhead, like a bar.
Yeah.
Or pull away from the bar. Or you can even add weights and do work with weights. Do something to some small scale that gives the body information.
Okay, let's say I've been sitting at my desk all day, and my hip flexors are tight, my shoulders are anti-rotated, they're tight.
Yeah.
And so I go in the gym, I was like, man, like I'm crazy tight today. And to me, doing like a passive hip flexor stretch, like holding in like in an Spider-Man stretch, that feels good.
Right.
To me, it kind of releases that.
Yeah.
After like, holding for 2 minutes, I feel good afterwards. What would you say to that person? So is it, hey, like don't do passive stretching, or it's like, hey, if you're gonna do passive stretching before you go do a squat, you need to also add in a mobility active component to that.
Yeah, so I would say to that person, listen to what your body's telling you. Your body's telling you that it needs to passively stretch.
Yeah.
Do it. It sounds like it's going to feel good. It does feel good. Do it. And let that be the primer for your mobility work, because when we do feel tight and we suddenly get thrown into mobility work, remember, it's strength training for your joints essentially.
Yeah.
It can feel it can feel like a jolt, like electrical jolt. So we don't really even want that to happen. So it's great that you want to do some flexibility, because your body needs that primer before it gets that that extra sauce that is mobility work.
Yeah.
So that way it's not, your nervous system's not suddenly being shocked to be awake.
Yeah.
So do it, and then follow up with a little bit of mobility. I call it the mobility, the flexibility mobility sandwich.
Yeah.
I like to do it before and after. This is just my jam, because we do it before to temporarily create a new window for us to work into, to crawl through. The nervous system suddenly like, hey, we've got some tissue relaxed.
Yeah.
It's free to be worked with. So then you add a little bit of weight, which is your body weight, or just isometric contractions on top of that. Then we get to lock in and keep what we created temporarily.
Yeah.
And then we add the flexibility in the back end, us pushing ourselves in range. It's going to allow for a few more degrees, potentially, for us to keep and lock in further.
Very cool. So let me ask you this. So like for some of our group training clients or personal training clients, or just anyone in general who's just trying to kind of build general fitness. Let's say we've kind of just left it off the table, right? Like we spend the last 20, 30 years not doing anything, and we realize like, man, I gotta exercise. Right? And so like our fitness is low in every area. Like we don't have strength, we don't have speed, we don't have power, we don't have great endurance, we don't have great mobility, flexibility. We gotta kind of like make all these improvements here, right? What kind of advice would you give to someone like that who's like, maybe they're doing our group training classes and they're getting kind of more fit and they're building their fitness, and we do have like a little component of mobility flexibility in there into the warm up like after the fact, but maybe they kind of hear this and they go, you know what, like I can use some more mobility flexibility. What would be some kind of advice that you might give to them?
To the individual who is new to using their body and they suddenly realize they need more flexibility and mobility.
Yeah.
What would be my advice to them? Man, that's a big question, because there's so many different ways to take that. Especially now as I've entered into a more generalist approach.
Yeah.
I could get real meta with answers these days.
Yeah.
So I'll try not to get super meta. This is with just like the everyday person walking.
Well, let's say someone's looking for like.
Give me your avatar. What? Yeah.
Let's say like this person's looking for like some real kind of specific stuff. Like, man, my hips are just really tight.
Yeah.
Like I'm training 4 days, 4 or 5 days a week. My hips are just kind of crazy tight. Like, how can I help these out? Like I'm cool. Like I got some like stretching. Like, should I be doing? Should I follow that plan you said? Like, hey, every day after workout, do this specific stretch that's gonna feel best on your hips on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and then do this active stuff on Tuesday, Thursday. Like a real applicable kind of like instruction for someone.
So someone who is new to using their body, and I'll tag on the hip. I feel tight in my hips, and yes.
Okay, let me structure the question just a little bit different.
Yeah.
For someone who's like very aware of where they're feeling tight.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Would it be a better idea to say, hey, find the stretch that feels like it hits
I
the
love
area?
that you're already coming to the conclusion yourself.
the best. Do that 3 days a week. You know, just pick an exercise. Do that. You know, after each workout 3 days a week, and then find the best do the cars 2 days a week.
Yeah.
Is it better to kind of stick to that one thing that, man, like that's where I really feel it?
Yeah.
Or is it better to say like, well, do a lot of stuff?
Yeah. These answers keep morphing in ways that, again, I could go in so many different directions. So you're always going to have a mobility specialist say it depends. It's just our jam sauce. It does depend, but I will answer that as specific as I can. To that individual who has identified where they feel sore or tight, and they've identified a stretch that feels good, cool. Take that, run with it.
Okay.
So you can teach yourself how to be your own guide when you don't have one. So you have that stretch, it feels good. After you do that stretch for 3 minutes, try to do that move, try to create that shape on your own.
Gotcha.
Try to create that shape on your own. See if it's your lower body, you're stretching that leg, that hip, the hamstrings, you're stretching the hamstrings. See if you can then create that shape on your own by lifting the leg somehow. If the individual knows where they're sore, repeat the last part of it.
I would just say if they kind of know. I was looking for more kind of like a very specific kind of prescriptive like.
You and RX.
And let me actually do it a different way. So for
I have one specific thing that I do say to people when they ask me what can I do to become more mobile.
Yeah. Okay.
When it's a very generalized question.
Yes.
Because I think the person that asked that question, trying to answer it in non-specific ways is also not helping that person. Right. So move your spine.
Okay.
Move your spine, move your hips. Your pelvis is a large joint.
Yeah.
Think of it in those terms. It's a huge joint. Your hips are huge joints, the largest joint in the human body. Size for the joints.
Yeah.
You imagine what cascade that's going to send up and down the body and how it feels if it can't move properly. So just think of it in those terms. So move your hips in circles. Try to find some hip cars. Do hip cars if you can every day. Every day. But here's what I don't like to say every day to this individual, because every day is a huge jump in percentage from not doing
from 0 to 7.
So do hip cars once. See how that feels and what change it creates. Let that change, that feeling, encourage you and prompt you to do it more often.
Yeah.
I find that even people doing hip cars 3 days a week, 2 days a week, they see results, they feel results very quickly.
Yeah, do them in your warm-up.
Yeah.
It just becomes your warm-up routine, then you can kind of start doing them every day.
Yes, and then the next would be the spine.
Yeah.
Move your spine. How do I move my spine? Well, what can the spine do? It can move in waves.
Yeah.
A very simple and well-known thing to do, cat-cow. See if you can do cat-cow one vertebra at a time.
Yeah.
That's your task.
Articulated cat-cow.
Articulated cat-cow.
Google it or YouTube it. It's called
Yeah.
articulated cat-cow. So hard to scrap.
It is. It's a cat-cow that'll make you sweat for sure.
Yeah. Okay, well, let me on that same topic, let me kind of like reword it in a different way, because I think now that I've kind of thought it out in my head. So what we found for a lot of people is having neglected fitness for a significant period of time. Now when they're now exposed to that, they don't really know how out of shape they are or how immobile they are until they start doing things like, oh crap, I'm pretty daggone immobile.
Right.
So it's kind of like, now I've been exposed to this fact, right?
Right.
And then they're like, okay, well, now I need to start building strength, and now I need to start building endurance, and I gotta start building mobility, right? And they may have this recognition like my ankles are tight, my hips are tight, my spine is tight, and my shoulders are tight. And so, okay, well, there's like stuff you do for your ankles, stuff you do for your hips, stuff you do for your spine, stuff you do for your shoulders. And sometimes I can just feel like, oh man, like I'm never gonna get there because like I'm already stretched to make it to the gym 3 days a week.
Right.
And now, I'm being told I need to be doing weight training. I'm told I need to be doing this endurance training, and now I gotta start doing like all these 3 or 4 mobility exercises for each joint. That's a lot.
Right.
So in that sense, would it be better for someone to say like, hey, start from the middle, work your hips, work your spine. Then once you've kind of addressed those for several weeks and you're starting to feel some improvements, now go to your shoulders.
Yes.
Once you see some improvements in there, now go to your ankles.
Yes.
Or is it better to say, well, hey, why don't you like spend 1 day on hips, maybe 1 day on shoulders, 1 day on ankles? Is it better to kind of like consolidate that work and say, hey, get some more consistent work in one area? Or is it better to say, hey, get some consistent work in all areas, kind of spread out more?
When the individual knows that their whole body isn't functioning the way it's supposed to, address the larger joints more consistently, and then dabble in the smaller joints.
Okay.
So ankles, wrists, the shoulders, I would do shoulders after focus on spine and hips.
Okay.
Because also that is related to the area above and below. If you're working the spine, it makes sense to move into the shoulders. It's also a large joint.
Yeah.
The smaller joints like wrists, elbows, knees, ankles, do give them some attention, but they're more of something that you'd be doing after you address the larger joints. That's something that I would personally recommend. Everyone does it different. Some people do all of them, and some of them say just do these specific ones.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like, I don't know.
It does depend though, like if someone has a history of like an ankle surgery or injury or shoulder, like I'm not going to keep that unattended to.
Yeah, not if they, I think if there's like a big giant, like your shoulder mobility is terrible, or like your wrist only goes to there, like what's going on, like where it's limiting like you doing the other stuff, like we can't do some strength training stuff because your wrist doesn't move. We gotta adjust, like that's a big, we gotta do that one first.
You gotta, if there's something significant, no matter the joint, give it attention. You know, it's a part of that assessment, that part of that taking inventory of understanding your body.
I feel like for like me personally, like I'll have this tendency to kind of like, not like overdo it in the sense of like, I'm like, oh, well, I need to do this thing for shoulders and this thing for hips and this, and then versus kind of, and then it overwhelms me. I just stop because I'm like, that's too many things to do. I don't have to do that. Versus like, hey, do cars every day in your hips, and your hips will probably feel a lot better. Like, okay, I'm gonna do that. I work out every day, so I can at least do the car every day.
If you could do cars while you make your coffee, your life will change.
I was just like, what if I'm just training someone? I just do a car.
Just do a car. Like if you can find a way to do these things in the mundane parts of life, and not make it a part of your workout, because we know that time at the gym is specific to whatever those gym goals are. You know, mobility is really kind of it's most fun in the mundane parts, in my opinion.
100%.
I don't like to do it in my workout. If I'm going to do like FRC based mobility, that's stuff that I'm doing when I'm making my coffee, when I'm just like standing there helping my kid with their homework, outside watching my kids play, stuff like that.
100%.
All
right, we're coming up on an hour, so so then it kind of takes me to my kind of final piece, which is, you know, as someone who is very passionate about health and fitness and is, you know, generally considered an expert on it. I also am like I could sit there and write up my own mobility program and do it. The problem is like I just don't. You know. And so I 100% believe in like finding experts in that area and then surrounding myself with them and letting them apply their expertise to me versus me trying to go like, well, I could do it. Yes, I could do it. It's just not going to be as good. I'm not going to be as accountable to it. And so for someone who's like recognizing like, man, I need someone just going to work with me on mobility, flexibility. tell us how people can maybe get in touch with you
Sure.
about Panorama and
Yeah.
just kind of give them that information.
For sure. So Panorama Movement is my movement gym. It's in Midtown, really close to the Children's Museum, little side street next to the train tracks. It's got a very interesting vibe and
It's
energy
awesome.
too. It's a cool little spot.
fun.
We
Yeah.
call it our junk gym. It's
Yeah.
a very neat little spot. But yeah, you can find me there physically. We have classes there in the evening, so we do group classes, but the way we do group classes is essentially teaching you how to be your own best teacher and understanding your body and understanding mobility and strength training for the joints
Yeah.
and for skills, because we're also working on skills like handstands and stuff like that. But it's for all bodies. Like
Yeah.
literally, if you are 60 years old and you want to acquire your first handstand, I would love that. Like, please come see me. You can find me and contact me through social media. I find that Instagram Messenger is the fastest way for people to reach me these days. Our handle is PanMoveMem, NEM as in Memphis.
Yeah.
PanMoveMem. You can also find my personal IG. You can reach me there. PanMoveMama, MANA. I'm also on Facebook, and you can also, find our website, panoramamovement.com.
Awesome, very cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, Britten.
Yes.
That was fun.
Super fun.
Yeah, hopefully people will take some good information from
Yeah.
here and start applying it, because you need to move better and feel better.
For sure.
All right, y'all.
100%.
NBS Fitness Radio out.
Peace out.
Thank you for listening to NBS Fitness Radio. If you enjoyed the podcast, be sure to share it with your friends, follow us on social media, and check out our website at www.nbsfitness.net. Hit the subscribe button and tune in next time for more NBS Fitness Radio.